my name's Dan, and in this video I'm going to show you how to set up a in-game menu or a pause menu in your Unreal project. And this is part of a series on how to do user interface things using the using widget blueprints, sometimes called Unreal Motion Graphics UMG. And what I've got here is just a standard third-person template, and I have created and added nothing yet so far to this. So I'm going to do the whole process. So this may take a little while. I'll try and go fairly fast with things to show you what's going on. So one thing that I've done is I hate this content draw thing, Control Space to get it. So I'm going to add a normal content thing. If I can, window, content browser. Somehow it seems to go in the background, and I'm going to put it at the bottom there. So I'm going to be in the content folder. So I'll create the widget first of all. So we're going to create just a very simple widget blueprint, which is going to have two buttons on it. It's going to have a resume button to go back to the game and a quit button. Of course, you could have as many buttons as you liked in here. And I'm going to call this down pause menu. So I have a habit, I've said this in previous videos, I have a habit of using a prefix when I create my things that's identifiable to me, just to make it easier to use, to find them when there's lots of lists of things. Okay, so let's open that up. I'm going to put a where are we? Panels. I'm going to put a canvas panel on, which is quite often the base panel of what you're going to do, and then within that I'm going to put a vertical box to hold the two buttons, and I'm going to make this so that it's in the middle regardless of what is going on. So I'm going to set the anchor to the center, and I'm going to set our offset positions to 0 and 0, and the alignment to 0.5, so it's in the middle of the box, regardless of where it is. And I'm going to give us a bit of size to this, 500 and 300, and I'm setting those sizes manually. I know you can add more things and it'll stretch as appropriately, but I'm doing this because the way I'm going to do the buttons is I'm going to make them fill the box. So you'll see what happens. Let's have a button. So I'm just going to create one button first, and then I'm going to clone it. That button is not inside the vertical box yet. There we go. So I'm going to change the size to fill, so it fills the whole of the thing that it's inside. I'm going to add 30 pixels padding around it, and then I'm going to put some text on that. Drag and drop that on there, and I'm going to call that resume. Let's do it in capitals. And white against that grey doesn't show up very well, so I'm going to use let's use a nice dark blue, kind of powdery dark blue colour. There we go. And now that's quite a big button, but what's going to happen when I clone that is that the two buttons between them will take up the space. So if I do duplicate, you then see that's a much more reasonable size. I'm going to change this one so that it says quit. Okay. So that's fairly straightforward. The other thing that I'm going to add to this is I'm going to make it so that when this appears, the background, so that the actual game is somewhat blurred, which is a fairly common thing to do, and you may not notice hugely because it's such a common thing. But I'm going to type in blur to give us a background blur, and I'm going to add that to the canvas panel. But what I'm going to do with that blur to make it fill the whole screen regardless is I'm going to go to the anchors and set the anchor to full screen. It hasn't changed size, but what it does is it changes the way that you put the offsets in here. And you've got offset left, offset top. I'm going to put in zeros for the offset right, and the offset bottom. So now we'll fill the screen regardless of how big the screen is, actually, as long as the canvas panel maps to it. And at the moment it's got no blur, so we've got a blur amount, blur strength down here, and as we put that up, you can see it gets more or less blurred. So what this will do is it'll blur the background. At the moment, you can see it's actually also blurring the buttons. And that's because we haven't told it which of our widgets should be on top or nearest to the player, kind of conceptually. And the way to do that is using this setting here, Z order. And what we're going to do is, so you do Z order 0 and then integers higher. And the higher the number, the closer to the player, so it masks things that are behind it. So if we take the vertical box, which holds all the buttons, and we change the Z order for that to 1, that just brings the whole thing in front of that blur. So that makes it nice and easy. There we go. Right, I'm going to compile that. Okay, so normally in the previous videos, when we've wanted to show a widget, we've done that inside the level blueprint. What I'm going to do this time is not that. I'm going to use the controller blueprint, and that's because we're going to get it to respond to some controls. So in order to do that, I'm going to need to create my own game controller. So game controller is, sorry, player controller. Player controller is one of the what I call the essential blueprints. There has to be a player controller being used, and there is a default one, but you can override it. So what I've done is I've created a blueprint which derives from player controller, and then I'm going to make sure this is being used by going to the game settings, project settings, maps and modes, and it's within the selected game mode. You can find the player controller class. I'm going to change it from the default one to the Dan controller. So now when I put things in the Dan controller, this will be active and will be used. Okay, so let's get into that and get into the event graph. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an instance of the pause menu, and I'm going to attach it to the viewport, but I'm going to hide it at the start, so it's not going to be visible. You might think that the best thing to do is to do this on the fly when you want it and when the menu is invoked. But with these objects, once you've created them, I'm not sure when they are deleted and when they disappear. And so this is potentially what's called in programming a memory leak, which is basically you might create more and more of these as you go on the game. Now, it's not a huge deal in terms of pause menus, but it may be with other things. And you need to get into the discipline of thinking about what's happening when you're creating objects. Every time you create something, you're going to need to know when it's going to be deleted. If it's persistent for the whole of the game, that's fine. But if you're creating things on the fly and doing it again and again, it's better to think about it. So what we're going to do then, yes, we're going to use event begin play, and we're going to create widgets, and going to make it one of our what did we call it? Going to Dan something, Dan pause menu. That seems very appropriate. And we're going to add it to the viewport. But we're going to hide it. So we're going to set visibility to be hidden. Okay. The other thing we want to do is we want to be able to control this, again, externally. Now, in one of the previous videos, I complained about not being able to control widgets from other scripts. The exception to this is if you do it at this stage where you create it and then you grab a handle to that, you can then control that at later times. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable inside our Dan control, which I'm going to call the pause menu, and it's going to be of type that widget Dan pause menu. You get various choices here. The one that you want for something like this is object reference. So we're going to set that variable to this instance of the Dan Pause menu class. All right, which means we now have it available for dealing with later. So let's just do a quick test. It's always good to do tests as you go along with stuff. So I'm going to test that the menu wasn't there. Menu is not there. Okay, that's good. Right. So what do I need to do next? I need to create code that will allow us to hide and show the menu. So I'm going to do that inside the player controller. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function for hiding, for showing the menu and for hiding the menu. And for, you might think it just needs to be the visibility. There's actually quite a few things that we want to do at the point where we invoke the menu and at the point where we kill the menu. So we're just going to create a function and call it show menu. And in here we need to get a reference to the pause menu and set visibility. Okay. So I'm going to make it visible. In order to interact with it, we're going to need the mouse pointer to be visible. And because we're in a player controller class, we have access to that directly because it's part of the player controller. So we're going to do set mouse. It's show mouse, isn't it? Set show mouse cursor. And we're going to set that to true. We also want control to be available to the UI and not to the game whilst we've got the pause menu. You don't want the player to be able to control things within the game whilst the pause menu is up. So we're going to do set control, if I can remember right what we need to do. Next, input. So set input mode, here we are, UI only. Okay. The other thing that we want to do is we want to make it so that the world that's the game world that is simulating is paused, and so that nothing else is going on. So no enemies are running around, no balls are bouncing or anything. Yes, this needs a reference to a player controller, so we'll just do self because we are a player controller, but it gives you the ability to do things to other players here if you needed to. Right. So the way to do that is there's a thing called the global time dilation. And we're going to set the global time dilation. If you set it as a 0, that means no time is passing. If you set it to 1, that means time's going at normal pace. You can actually use this to speed up and slow down simulation in the game. So if you use fractional like 0.5 or 2, you can make the game go at different rates, which it can be useful in particular circumstances. So I think that's everything that we need in terms of showing the menu. And what we want to do for hiding the menu is to do the same steps but the opposites. What is good practice in programming is it may not be important what the order is for these things, but when we're setting things in order and we're unsetting things, in case there is a dependency, we do it in reverse. So we're going to do that in another function, and we're going to call that, I'm just going to rename that show menu because it just says show men. I'm going to do hide menu. Now let's try and remember what we did. So we did the time dilation first, set global time dilation to 1, that's normal running, but we want to set the set input mode to game only. That needs a connection to a player controller, so we'll put self in there. We want to set mouse cursor. What's the visibility? Okay. I've already forgotten what it is. Let's go back to show menu. Show mouse cursor. You'd think it'd be hide. You see, this is one of those ones that I think is not as logical as it should be. Set show mouse cursor. And it's to be false. We have set it to be true in there. That's the UI, and we need to then set the visibility of the menu. Pause menu itself. Set visibility to hidden. Okay. So now the question is, if I press play, we still can't do anything because we haven't got a way of invoking the menu or getting rid of the menu. We'll do the getting rid of the menu because that's easier. No, we'll do the invoking the menu first. Right, so version 5 and beyond of Unreal Engine has this advanced input capabilities, which is meant to, in the long run, make things simpler. I'm not convinced personally that it is simpler, but it does make things easier to find than when they're in the game settings. So we've got a thing called action and a thing called action mapping. Now we've got already, because it's in the third person template, this action mapping context is being used. It's being set in the third person character. I think it should be set in the player controller, but never mind. And we've got 3 actions. We've got jump, look, and we've got move. So we're going to add one. And how would you think that you would invoke the pause menu? By pressing the escape button. So I'm going to add where we input action, and I'm going to call it IA escape. Actually, no, let's call it IA pause because that's a better description. I don't think I need to add anything to that. It just tells me what the name of the action is, and we need to go to the IMC default, the input mapping context, to try and work out when that's going to happen. We've got our 3 already in there, and we're going to add one. So we're going to plug that into IA pause, and we're going to make it trigger on the escape key. There we are. Now there's a wrinkle to using the escape key, which is that in the editor, by default, when you press the escape key, it quits simulation. But you can change that. So if you go into Edit, Editor Preferences, I'm going to try and remember exactly where this is, Keyboard Shortcuts, and it's Stop. Now I've already changed mine. So in most projects, if you haven't done anything to change this, this will probably be escape. If I press escape, that puts that in there. So that will appear there, and I'm going to kill that. And I've added backspace to get away from to back out of the simulation instead. So escape has been changed in the project settings so that it's no longer used for quitting simulation. Right. Are we nearly there yet? Yes, actually. So what we want to do is use that event. So I'm going to go into the event graph and get the IA pause event. We don't want the enhanced action value here. We want the one that's got the little action icon on it. Now that gives us lots and lots of different options coming out of it. I really don't understand the differences between these. I maybe could guess at some of them, but I'm just going to use triggered, and I'm going to then do show pause. So I call it show menu, didn't I? Yeah. Show menu. There we go. So that should happen. And let's just show that. So I'm running around, and I press escape. And yes, hurrah, my menu comes up. Nothing happens, though, because I haven't plugged anything into doing that. Now, earlier today, just before I recorded this video, I spent a good hour trying to work out how to get it so that once the menu is open, if you press escape again, it disappears. And that's a fairly standard way of doing things. Now, I couldn't find a simple way, and I think the way to do it would be to create a separate input mapping context for when you're in the menu, and to switch mapping context when you go in, and then to use it there. The problem that I was having is that if I put that event, the input mapped pause, in the menu, so just if I try and do a toggle, then actually it doesn't respond to it when we've got the menu open, because I've taken away the input control from the game. So the relevant place to put it would be inside the widget, because that's the user interface, the UI, and that can receive events, and I could do it there. So I tried putting it in there, and when I did that, I found that it would immediately, it stopped working altogether. And I think the reason was because it would go show menu, hide menu so quickly that or there was a conflict between which one of them should be working and showing it. So instead, we're going to do it. We're not going to try and use the escape button. If you didn't follow that, don't worry about it too much. It just means I'm not going to use the escape key to get out of the menu. I'm going to use the resume button, which is exactly what the resume button's for. So let's go into that widget and get the resume, and then go down here to the onClicked and create an event for that. And what we want to do is we want to get hold of the player controller and do the hide menu function. So get player controller. And of course, because this functionality is part of the specific kind of player controller that we've got, which is the down controller, we need to tell it that we want to check that this player controller is a down controller and use it as a down controller, which is what's called a cast. So cast to down player controller. If we happen to have something else plugged in, then it wouldn't come out of here, and it would come out of, execution would come out of cast failed. So it's got some protection in there. So anyway, as down player controller, we've then got that function, hide menu. And that is not yet, yes, that should be responding to the clicked button, because we have got that in there. And I'm just going to go back to the designer, highlight the quit button, and have the quit on here, which is just the simple quit mode. Quit game. So if everything's gone right, this will be working, and let's have it in full F11 glorious size. Let's click a box and then jump, and I've hit the escape button and the menu's come up, and I jumped on purpose just before because this has paused the simulation. I can click resume and it carries on, and then if I do it again I can hit quit and I leave. So that is how to do a simple pause menu. Obviously there's a whole lot of other things that you can do with pause menus, and I hope I've not just shown you how, but explained what's going on and how to make things happen. There's a lot of little moving parts here to plug together. If there were bits of that you didn't understand, I've got videos covering pretty much everything that I did there on my channel. In the next video, which will be the last in this series, I'm going to show you how to do a start game menu, but that's it from me for now.